Hi there. The Church of Nowhere and its commandments. Thou shalt not stereotype, being the first commandment that we looked at in part one of this. This is the concluding part. And this concerns a video by Danny Shine, which was made 4 years ago. And he was setting up his megaphone outside Sotheby's, which is a very, very famous London art dealer, um, where art auctions and things like that are held very obviously regularly, and through which a hell of a lot of money passes. People buying and spending a lot of money. Now he was all, his main thing about Danny Shine is like a lot of people, he questions whether modern art is actually worth the money that is charged for it. He also questions whether art itself is crazily overpriced and somehow it's kind of obscene that people have so much money to spend on modern art and on classical art. Of course, he was always going to run into trouble with libertarians because their argument is going to be, who are you to tell me how to spend my money? Who are you to tell me how much I can charge for my modern art pieces? And if I want to charge £20,000 for brick art, and people like my brick art, and somebody writes me a check for £20,000 for one of my pieces, who are you to tell me that I can't do that? So he was up against the libertarian argument from the jump, really. But we won't go into that here. What's strange, what's interesting, is that he was approached by somebody with long hair, a man with long hair, looked like something from the 1970s or sort of from the White Album of the Beatles or something. And this guy, and it's very, very clearly documented on video, actually threatened Danny Shine with something along the lines that something very bad will happen to you if you don't F off right now. And he actually did push Danny Shine a little bit as well, and after which he actually clearly and audibly actually threatens Danny Shine with what amounts to physical harm. And this is just a sort of precursor of the footage for the Sotheby's protest, as it were. I guess that this guy had his issues. He looked pretty jacked. And of course, when money is concerned, even the most alternative person can become quite nasty when they go into fear and when they go into greed, but mostly when they go into fear. And that's when frightened people become rather aggressive as they defend their position or try to justify their position, or just basically are very, very worried about cash flow and the fact that they may be spending too much money or money that they haven't got. They're worried about selling their pieces of art in a society which actually is pretty hostile towards modern art generally. And modern artists do get a bad rap, and are even could be said to be victimized and against for their art output, which you could say is outrageous and all the rest of it. I don't know the rights and wrongs of charging money for pieces of art, or charging a lot of money for pieces of art. I suppose Henry Moore comes to mind. I mean, some of his stuff was purchased by corporations and big companies, and he saw no problem with that. And his art is sort of heralded as incredible, sort of on a par with some of the great sculptors of the Florentine Renaissance and that kind of thing. Even though they're very minimalist compared to Michelangelo or something like that. But anyway, or Rodin or something like that. But obviously when people modern art is concerned with concept, then people do complain that what you're paying for is the concept and not the execution, and not the skill of the artist so much as the concept that the artist had when they started creating this piece of modern art. But anyway, the point about it, and to get back on track with the stereotyping, is that uh, people would be surprised maybe about the alternative-looking person being so aggressive. Perhaps one of the most aggressive people that Danny Shiner's ever come across, in fact, looked like he was a sort of midnight toker, and and listened to progressive rock, and and generally was a sort of okay kind of swinging kind of person. But of course that you can't judge a book by its cover. There's lots of people that look like certain things. They look goth, or they look hippie, or whatever. But their actual norms, values, and beliefs may be very far from the people that they want to look like, basically. So that this doesn't mean a thing, really. And I know this is pretty obvious, really. But like somebody came up to me one day on the street. I was giving out C&D leaflets, and they threatened me, and they looked like a sort of long-haired kind of midnight toker kind of alternative sort of person. But of course, you've got to bear in mind that a lot of people that call themselves alternative are alternative only by the standards of the 1970s. But in fact, when you're into death metal or heavy metal or something like that, you could actually be pretty conservative in your norms, values, and beliefs, and yet still like metal music. And maybe you don't like hippies and protesters and green people and people into climate change. You could be really hostile towards them, and it doesn't really make any difference what sort of music you're into, or whether you're into drugs or something like that, because there's plenty of conservative people who are or have been midnight tokers, and that's okay. They have to admit to it when they become politicians, which is a bit awkward, really. Which is one reason why you shouldn't go into drugs, because it could backfire on you later in life, and you have to admit that you did do drugs, and that might affect your employment, or it might affect the people you work with, or if you're a politician, that might affect your chances at the polling booth. You know what I mean? So that's one thing to buy. Don't sort of get into that lifestyle or peer group, because you might not be able to extricate yourself later on in life, or you might not be able to pass it off as a thing that young people do, and I was just young, and because people might still hold you to account for doing that. You know what I mean? Anyway, enough of that. So stereotyping is when we can't judge a book by its cover, and that you look at somebody and think that their belief system encompasses X, Y, and Z, when in fact it doesn't at all. And there's no reason why it should. And not only that, but of course a lot of people that look alternative, sort of have long hair, and arty farty people. They actually, as I say, could be libertarians. Now, libertarians are not just conservatives. I mean, libertarians, some of them are sort of saying, you socialists, you green protesters, stay out of my hair. Pardon the pun. Stay out of my hair, stay off my back. I'm a libertarian. I can do what I like. I can smoke cigarettes if I want to. I can eat meat. I can drink red wine. Go away, leave me alone. I can do what I like. And there's a lot of people in the USA, the Libertarian Party. It's a whole political party dedicated to libertarianism. And libertarianism is, of course, a spectrum of beliefs and norms, values, and beliefs, of course. But generally speaking, libertarians are not very tolerant of people telling them what they should be doing on a moral level. They don't like to be told what to do. They don't like to be made to feel that they're immoral in some way. And some of them get extremely hostile to the concept of being criticised on a moral level, you see. And they could be considered to be alternative people. And then again, there's people that look like hippies, but in fact are very conservative kind of people. And I think basically also, just because somebody is alternative doesn't mean to say they're not going to go into fear and greed, or they're not going to cut corners, or they're not going to rip people off. I'm sure that anybody is capable of ripping anybody off when it comes to some sort of business contract. And the art world is incredibly cutthroat, and anybody who gets involved in modern art will tell you how cutthroat and bitchy it is, and people putting each other down, and there's all the critics, of course, what they think of your stuff is very important to you, or could be. And it's a rough and tumble world out there in the world of modern art, as it is in the world of pop music. As we all know, it's a nasty place. It can be a very nasty place, and people can say incredibly nasty things about you. So one little protester outside Sotheby's with his megaphone could be the final straw for some of these people that look alternative. And of course, your expectation of somebody, because you think they're alternative, they ought to be nice people. And you've already defined what a nice person is. A person who believes in climate change would be a nice person, and a person that didn't believe in climate change would be a nasty person, right? And that's the way that you'd see the world. Well, I mean, you could look at somebody and say they look like a climate change denier. They look straight, they look square. So I'll hate on them. And unbeknownst to you, they're a professor of climate change. They're an expert in it. Or you could look at somebody who looks pretty hippie-ish and find that they're a skeptic as far as climate change is concerned. I mean, they may even believe in lots of other things that could be called alternative or hippie, but they're not really into the idea of climate change. They don't think there's enough evidence, blah, blah, blah. So then do you hate on them? Do you know what I mean? So, you can get very complicated very quickly when you think of people that you might like to hate, or people that you might like to hero worship or love, or dedicate your life to. And then, of course, people also change as well. So somebody might start off in life being a radical when they were young, and they become really, really quite conservative when they're older. Which is the usual thing, but it's also possible the other way around. It's also possible that people start off being conservative when they're young, and actually become really, really quite rebellious and radical when they're older, and so therefore that they go into the sort of peer group that they were in when they were younger, and suddenly they don't fit in that peer group because as they got older they got more radical about things. And people also, I mean, we won't cover too much of this because it sort of goes into thou shalt not package and all that kind of stuff. All I'm saying is that your expectations of somebody on the basis of their appearance, is really, really quite a disastrous habit to get into. If you're one of these people that literally judges a book by its cover, then you're going to run into serious, what they call cognitive dissonance. And it might not affect you consciously so much, but it might affect you unconsciously or subconsciously. And that might make you not be able to work with certain people because of their appearance, and those are the people that you really need to work with in life. And yet, you give your heart and soul to somebody because they look like somebody that believes in what you believe in, and it turns out that they don't believe in what you believe in, or if they do, they don't do things the way you do things, and then you end up falling out with somebody, even though they're supposed to be quite alternative people, and you end up hating them. And so things can get very complicated. We live in a nuanced world. We don't live in a black and white world. People are going to let you down. People are going to support you. Some of the people that, entertaining angels unaware, sometimes the people that you think are going to be your enemies turn out to be your best friends, or at least your critics could turn out to be, on your side ultimately. because they turn you back from a disastrous course, for example. You're on the road to nowhere, and they actually put you in a different sort of road, on a different path, even though they're the sort of people that you wouldn't normally get on with. Do you know what I mean? So it's complicated, as it says on Facebook, and and so I just think, judge everybody on their own merits, and literally, as Jesus said, by their fruits shall they know them. So you could look at anybody, and it's basically what they do, and what they come up with, and what they create, is ultimately more important than how they look. So that's just kind of the part two of stereotyping. And I've probably glossed over this whole issue really, really seriously. So if anybody wishes to add anything, please do.